We are finally on the cusp of the release of Death Stranding 2 on the beach. This title marks a major shakeup in Hideo Kojima's storied career that hasn't happened since the early 2000s. Expectations are high for Death Stranding's sequel, but they should maybe even be a bit higher for fans of Kojima's lifetime work. After quite a long wait, eager fans will finally be able to play Death Stranding 2 on the beach on Tuesday, June 24th, should they have bought the Early Access Digital Deluxe Edition of the game, while the Standard Edition releases 2 days later on June 26th. As a longtime fan of Kojima's work myself, I can't blame the diehards for wanting to play as soon as possible, seeing as his titles are often filled with shocking twists, spectacle, and more that I would rather experience in playing it myself than scrolling on social media. Death Stranding 2 specifically exists in a bit of a strange legacy within the context of Kojima's several decades as a game creator. DS2 marks the first time since 2001 that Kojima is making a direct sequel to an original piece of his work. His first, number 2, in almost 24 years. Sure, the Metal Gear Solid series saw multiple sequels, but there was only one game that was the first sequel. One game that existed purely in connection to that original groundbreaking release. Similarly, Death Stranding brought a new method of asynchronous cooperative play to the masses in a new world with new characters, ideas, and gameplay. There is no greater Death Stranding universe that exists just yet that this new game needs to fit into and reference or retcon. There is only the first Death Stranding, which released to much acclaim but in the end was a love it or hate it experience. Going into launch week, recent comments from Kojima and his chosen composer for the game's soundtrack, Woodkid, have addressed the nature of controversy and division amongst players with Kojima's previous work. Woodkid commented that Kojima went back and even made changes to Death Stranding 2 in efforts to make it more controversial and divisive following near universal positive playtests. Kojima seems to be a bit of a person of habit with his games and what he seeks players to get out of them. With Death Stranding in the original Metal Gear Solid, he wanted to impress and surprise players, leaving them feeling and exploring those feelings rather than thinking about the logistics of things in the story. Be it through game mechanics or presentation of cinematics, he wanted players to experience something they simply hadn't before. With the release of Metal Gear Solid 2, that work is only able to exist in the context of the original game. It's almost a deconstruction of that landmark release in every way, but specifically in how it treats the player. Infamously, MGS2 was incredibly controversial on release due to its bait-and-switch protagonist swap of the cool, grizzled, and badass Solid Snake to the new age, very green soldier Raiden. But that choice itself is intrinsically tied to the message of Metal Gear Solid 2 and how it exists as a response to that original game. And since 2001, Kojima has never had the opportunity to respond to a landmark release of his in the same way. Metal Gear Solid 3, 4, and even 5 exist beholden to the canon of the greater series, coming up with story reasons to connect things that seemed insignificant at one point in the first and second titles, and only growing more complex with every release. Now with Death Stranding 2 on the beach, Kojima is once again in a position where there are no lore-based franchise beholden expectations or rules in making this follow-up. For the first time since Metal Gear Solid to Metal Gear Solid 2, he's operating with a clean slate in how he chooses to respond to the players of his new original creation. How will he treat the story of Death Stranding in Death Stranding 2? How will he treat the fans of the first game? How will its mechanics treat those who felt very refreshed by the game's stance on violence and cooperation? Does he feel resentful at all towards the way that game was received? There's a lot to be gleaned from initial reviews so far. Death Stranding 2 on the beach seems to be making combat a larger focus thanks to how it's implemented compared to the first game. While the original title deliberately favored connection and cooperation over violence, or the rope over the stick, it seems making combat more satisfying in Death Stranding 2, paired with the ideological question, should we have connected, being displayed throughout the game's marketing so far, implies that there will be some consequence and violence after the more hopeful and idealistic story of the first game. Once again, similar to the leap of Metal Gear Solid to Metal Gear Solid 2, Death Stranding 2 is benefiting from a new generation of hardware. with more dynamic weather effects, advancements made to Sony's Decima engine, and the extra power of the PlayStation 5, greater spectacle and visuals are on the table to match DS2's seemingly newfound embrace of combat set pieces and action as Sam traverses the post-Death Stranding apocalypse in Australia this time. Players saw the Decima engine take great leaps from its use in Horizon Zero Dawn to Death Stranding, and then again later to Horizon Forbidden West. Based on everything we've seen so far, Death Stranding 2 on the beach seems to be continuing to make strides in just how fantastic that proprietary engine has been at helping developers of PlayStation exclusives sing. DS2 looks like it will be a true flex of both the PlayStation 5 and PS5 Pro hardware, the first major title to do so for the Blue brand in 2025. There are a lot of reasons to be excited for Death Stranding 2 on the beach, from its new locations, new companions, new mechanics, renewed focus on combat for those let down by the first game's shooting, and as always, a journey that will be full of unforgettable moments brought to you by Hideo Kojima. Are you planning on diving into Death Stranding 2 on the beach when it launches later this week? Were you a fan of the first game? Let us know what your expectations are for Hideo Kojima's new title, and for more on Death Stranding 2 in the world of gaming, stay tuned to Game Rant.